My child, stop what you're doing right now and listen, because this moment is not sluchati, and these words are not passing through you by accident. I am speaking into the place you've been carrying quietly, and this message, I know what you've been praying for, is not about chance or comfort, but about timing. You have wondered if your prayers mattered, if the waiting meant anything, if you were seen at all. I am calling your attention now because something you've been asking for is closer than you think, and your heart needs to be awake to receive what is being revealed. Listen before you scroll, before you sigh, before you tell yourself one more time that nothing has changed. I am speaking to you now, and I am not guessing, I am not assuming, I am not distant. I know what you've been praying for, not just the words you formed with your lips, but the ones that never made it past the tightness in your chest. I heard you when your voice trembled and you stopped mid-sentence, because you didn't know how to ask anymore. I heard you when you prayed the same prayer again and felt foolish for repeating it, wondering if silence meant disinterest. You need to understand this first, before anything else unfolds. Not one prayer you have whispered has fallen to the ground unnoticed. Not one tear slipped down your face without purpose. Not one night you lay awake staring at the ceiling passed without me being present beside you, listening more closely than you realize. You prayed in faith at first, bold and hopeful, believing the answer would come quickly. Then time passed, and your prayers grew quieter, shorter, more guarded. You began to pray with caution, protecting yourself from disappointment. I saw that shift. I heard the change in your tone. I noticed how you stopped asking with expectation and started asking with survival in mind. Yet even then, I listened. I listened when you prayed while driving, when your hands were busy but your heart was heavy. I listened when you prayed in fragments, when all you could say was, "Lord, please," or "I can't do this anymore." You wondered if those prayers counted. They did. They still do. You need to know this. I am not moved only by eloquent words or perfect faith. I am moved by honesty. I am moved by persistence. I am moved by the way you kept coming back to me even when you were tired of hoping. You prayed in moments when you felt strong, and you prayed in moments when you felt empty. Both reached me. When you whispered because others were sleeping, I was awake. When you prayed silently because you didn't have the strength to speak, I heard the sound of your heart. When you thought, maybe God is tired of hearing this, I leaned in closer, not farther away. I know what you have been praying for because I know you. I know the fear behind the request. I know the history that led you to ask. I know the wounds that shaped the words. I know the disappointment you carry from prayers you believe went unanswered before. And still, you came to me. That matters more than you realize. Every time you prayed instead of giving up, something was happening, something deeper than you could see. You were being held together when you thought you were barely holding on. You were being strengthened in ways you didn't ask for but desperately needed. Do not mistake my silence for absence. Do not confuse waiting with neglect. I have been present in every moment you doubted me, and I did not turn away. This conversation is only beginning. What I am revealing to you now will make sense of the nights you cried, the days you questioned, and the prayers you thought disappeared into the air. Stay with me. I am still speaking. There is a prayer you never fully spoke, and I want you to know this before you hide it again. I heard that too. You carried it carefully, turning it over in your mind, testing how it might sound if it ever left your mouth, then pulling it back because you were afraid of what it would mean if it went unanswered. You told yourself it was safer to keep it quiet, safer to ask for less, safer to pretend you didn't want it that badly. But I was already there, listening beneath the silence, reading the ache you tried to manage with restraint. You feared that saying it out loud would expose how much you needed it, how deeply it mattered, how vulnerable you truly are. You feared that if you named it, and nothing happened, the disappointment would break something inside you. I understand that fear. I saw the moment you swallowed the words and chose silence instead. You convinced yourself that unspoken prayers don't count, that maybe they don't weigh as much, that maybe they don't reach as far. But the truth is, The prayers you are afraid to say often carry the most weight, because they are bound up with your deepest hopes and your oldest wounds. That prayer, the one about healing, about restoration, about direction, about love, about freedom, has lived in you longer than you realize. It shaped the way you approach life. It influenced the decisions you made and the risks you avoided. You thought keeping it hidden would protect you, but it has been shaping you all the same. I know why you hesitated. I know the history that taught you caution. I know the disappointment that trained you to lower your expectations. You weren't afraid because the prayer was wrong. You were afraid because it mattered. You were afraid because asking would require honesty, and honesty would require surrender. You didn't want to admit how much you wanted change, how tired you were of carrying the same burden, how desperate you felt for something to finally shift. You tried to dress your prayers in safer language, asking for strength instead of deliverance, peace instead of answers, patience instead of breakthrough. And those prayers mattered too, but the unspoken ones still lived in your chest, knocking quietly, waiting for acknowledgement. I have never been intimidated by your honesty. I am not unsettled by your longing. I am not threatened by the size of what you hope for. You need to hear this clearly. Your fear did not disqualify you. Your hesitation did not diminish the prayer. Even when you couldn't speak it, I received it. Even when you doubted whether it was appropriate, realistic, or too much to ask, I understood exactly what you were reaching for. I saw the way you rehearsed conversations that never happened, imagined outcomes you didn't allow yourself to hope for, and quietly asked, "What if?" before stopping yourself. I am not asking you to pretend you are braver than you feel. I am inviting you to trust that you don't need to protect me from your truth. You don't need to edit yourself in my presence. This conversation is opening that door now. The prayer you were afraid to say aloud is not a liability, it is a doorway. And as we continue, you will begin to see why that prayer has been stirring for so long, why it hasn't let you go, and why it is connected to more than just an answer. Stay with me. I am not finished speaking into what you've been carrying in silence. There have been moments, quiet ones, heavy ones, when you wondered if your words were reaching anything at all. You didn't say it out loud, but the question crept in when nothing seemed to change. Are you still listening, or am I speaking into emptiness? You watched days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and the silence felt louder than any response could have been. You told yourself to stay faithful, to keep believing, but beneath that determination was a growing ache, a sense of being unheard. I know how that feels to you. I know how discouraging it is to keep showing up when you don't see evidence that anyone is responding. And I want you to understand something deeply right now. Your questioning did not push me away. You began to interpret silence as distance, delay as disinterest. You measured my care by outcomes you could see and timelines you could understand. When the answer didn't arrive the way you imagined, you started to internalize the quiet, wondering if you had done something wrong, if you had prayed incorrectly, if you lacked the kind of faith that produces results. You replayed your words, examined your motives, searched yourself for flaws that might explain the stillness. But silence is not absence, and waiting is not abandonment. Listening does not always sound like speaking, and presence does not always announce itself with immediate change. I have been listening in ways you could not perceive. While you listened for answers, I listened to your heart. While you waited for movement, I observed your endurance. While you wondered if I had turned away, I was watching how you learned to stand without leaning on certainty. You wanted reassurance in the form of resolution, but I was offering something deeper, the kind of faith that grows even when conditions are unclear. That does not mean your longing was misplaced. It means the work being done was quieter than you expected, but no less real. You need to know this. I am not inattentive to repetition. When you prayed the same prayer again, I did not sigh in impatience. When you asked, "How much longer?" I did not consider it a lack of trust. Persistence is not a problem to me. It is evidence that you still believe something is possible, even when you're tired. And when your prayers began to sound more like conversations than requests, more honest, more raw, more unsure I was still listening. Especially then. Sometimes the deepest listening happens when the surface grows quiet. The silence you experienced was not a wall between us. It was a space where something new could form. You were learning how to remain connected without constant reassurance, how to keep showing up without guarantees. That kind of trust is not built in noise. It is built in stillness. As this continues, you will begin to recognize that what felt like distance was actually a different kind of closeness, one that did not rely on immediate answers but on sustained presence. Stay with me here. The listening never stopped, and what comes next will help you understand why. Let me stop you right here. Before that old thought settles in again, the quiet you experienced was not me turning away. It was me working in ways you could not yet recognize. You assume silence meant disinterest because you are used to equating love with immediate response, care with quick resolution. When nothing changed on the surface, you filled in the gaps with your own conclusions, telling yourself that perhaps you had asked for too much, waited too long, or misunderstood what was possible. But silence is not the same as refusal. Stillness is not the same as absence. What felt like rejection was actually preparation unfolding beneath the noise you expected but did not hear. You see, preparation rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with the relief of an answer or the clarity of a finished story. Preparation often feels like delay, like repetition, like standing in the same place while everything else seems to move forward. You prayed for relief, and instead you were given endurance. You prayed for answers, and instead you were given perspective. You prayed for change, and instead you were invited to grow. That is why it felt confusing. You were looking for results, while something deeper was being formed within you. And I allowed the silence because the work required space for reflection, space for honesty, space for strengthening what would soon be tested. If I had answered too quickly, you would have received what you asked for without becoming who you needed to be to carry it well. You might have mistaken relief for healing, or resolution for wholeness. Silence slowed you down long enough for you to notice patterns you had been avoiding, attachments you needed to loosen, fears you had learned to tolerate. It gave you time to feel what you had been suppressing and to confront what you had been managing rather than addressing. That is not rejection. That is care that looks beyond the moment and into the future you cannot yet see. You were being prepared not just to receive an answer, but to sustain it. Prepared to recognize it when it comes. Prepared to steward it with wisdom rather than urgency. Prepared to stand steady instead of scrambling. The silence taught you patience you didn't know you were capable of, resilience you didn't think you had, and honesty you had been postponing. It stripped away the illusion that control would bring peace and replaced it with the understanding that trust is built slowly, often in the absence of reassurance. You thought silence meant you were forgotten. In truth, it meant you were being considered carefully. You thought it meant you were being tested. In truth, you were being strengthened. Nothing in this season was accidental. Every quiet moment carried intention. Every unanswered question was holding space for something more complete to emerge. As we continue, you will begin to see how preparation changes the way you receive what you've been praying for and why the waiting mattered more than you ever realized. Now hear this, because it changes everything. The prayer you've been carrying is not just about what you want. It is about who you are becoming in the process of asking. You thought the request stood alone, separate from your growth, separate from your story. But nothing you bring forward exists in isolation. Every desire you have placed before me is intertwined with your character, your readiness, your capacity to hold what you're asking for without losing yourself. That is why the journey has felt personal, sometimes uncomfortably so. You are not waiting on an outcome. You are moving through a transformation. You asked for change, and it stirred parts of you that had grown accustomed to comfort. You asked for clarity, and it required you to sit with uncertainty. You asked for healing, and it brought buried pain to the surface. You asked for purpose, and it challenged the way you define success. None of this is coincidence. What you are asking for demands a version of you that is more grounded, more honest, more resilient than the one who first prayed the prayer. And that version of you is being shaped right now, even when it feels slow, even when it feels costly. You wondered why the path felt so internal, so reflective, so demanding. You expected doors to open outwardly, but instead you were invited inward. You were asked to examine your motives, your fears, your expectations. You were nudged to let go of identities that no longer fit and to question narratives you had accepted without challenge. This was not punishment. It was alignment. What you are asking for cannot coexist with the same habits, the same assumptions, the same emotional patterns. Something had to shift, and that something was you. Becoming is rarely comfortable. It requires releasing familiar versions of yourself, even ones that kept you safe once. It requires patience with a process you cannot rush and humility to admit you don't have everything figured out. You are learning to listen differently, to respond instead of react, to trust without demanding proof. These are not side effects of waiting. They are the substance of it. You are being shaped to recognize the answer when it arrives and to hold it without fear, without self-sabotage, without shrinking back into old ways. What you are asking for is not separate from your story, it is an extension of it. The prayer has stayed with you because it is calling you forward, inviting you to grow into something more whole, more steady, more aligned. As this continues, you will begin to notice that the changes within you are not distractions from the answer. They are preparation for it. You are not standing still. You are becoming. And that becoming is exactly why this journey has unfolded the way it has. Let me say this plainly, because your heart needs clarity more than comfort right now. I could have answered you the moment you asked, but speed would have given you relief, not wisdom. You assumed that a fast response would have proven care, that immediacy would have meant love, that quick resolution would have validated your faith. But what you are carrying, what you are asking for, what you are becoming ready to receive, these things are not meant to be rushed. You live in a world that celebrates instant results, but depth is never formed in haste. I did not delay because I was unwilling. I delayed because I was attentive. I saw what you could not yet see. I understood the weight of what you were requesting and the cost of receiving it too soon. A quick answer would have placed something fragile into unprepared hands. It would have confirmed your desire without strengthening your discernment. It would have satisfied the moment while leaving future fractures unresolved. You were asking for an outcome, but the outcome required a foundation. You wanted change, but change without stability would have left you overwhelmed. You wanted clarity, but clarity without patience would have made you rigid. You wanted breakthrough, but breakthrough without endurance would have collapsed under pressure. Wisdom considers not only what you want, but what you can sustain. That is why timing mattered. That is why restraint was an act of care, not withholding. You thought waiting meant you were behind, but you were being protected from misalignment. You were being shielded from receiving something good at the wrong time, in the wrong condition, for the wrong reasons. You needed space to mature emotionally, to grow steady internally, to loosen your grip on outcomes you were trying to control. A fast answer would have bypassed those lessons, and you would have paid for that later. What feels like delay now would have felt like regret later if wisdom had not guided the timing. You are learning that readiness is not measured by desire alone. Wanting something deeply does not automatically mean you are prepared to hold it well. Readiness is shaped by patience, by humility, by the willingness to sit with uncertainty without losing yourself. You are learning how to wait without becoming bitter, how to hope without demanding proof, how to trust without constant reassurance. These are not obstacles to the answer. They are the very things that will allow you to receive it without fear or self-destruction. I chose wisdom over speed because wisdom lasts. Speed gives you a moment. Wisdom gives you a future. As this continues, you will begin to recognize that the answer you receive will not just arrive, it will fit. It will align with who you have become, not who you were when you first asked. And when it does, you will understand that waiting was not wasted time, but intentional preparation that made room for something whole. Pay attention here, because this explains why the process has felt heavier than you expected. You asked for change, But what you truly needed first was strength. You believed that if circumstances shifted, your struggle would ease. You imagined that once the situation resolved, you would finally feel steady, confident, capable. But strength does not grow in ease, it grows in resistance. Before anything around you could change, something within you had to become unshakable. That is why the answer didn't come in the form you anticipated. Instead of removing the weight immediately, I helped you learn how to carry it without collapsing. You have been enduring more than you thought you could, and that endurance is not accidental. Every time you stayed when you wanted to quit, something strengthened. Every time you chose honesty over denial, something solidified. Every time you showed up tired, but willing, something rooted itself deeper inside you. You asked for relief, and instead you were given resilience. You asked for an escape, and instead you were given capacity. That felt unfair at times. It felt like being asked to do more with less. But what you were gaining was something no quick solution could have provided. Strength changes how you experience everything. It changes how you respond to disappointment, how you handle uncertainty, how you stand when things don't go as planned. Without strength, change would have been temporary. You might have found yourself back in the same patterns, the same fears, the same fragility, just in a different setting. Strength ensures that when change comes, it lasts. It ensures that you don't just survive improvement, you sustain it. You don't crumble under the weight of new responsibility or retreat when things get complex. You didn't notice strength forming because it doesn't announce itself loudly. It grows quietly, often unnoticed, through repetition and perseverance. It shows up in the way you breathe through moments that once overwhelmed you, in the way you pause instead of react, in the way you remain present instead of shutting down. You are steadier now than you were. You may not feel powerful, but you are more grounded. You may still feel tired, but you are not as easily shaken. That is strength, even if it doesn't look dramatic. This strength is not meant to replace the change you desire. It is meant to support it. When the shift comes, you will meet it with clarity instead of fear, with wisdom instead of urgency. You will recognize that what once felt unbearable has made you capable of holding far more than you imagined. As we continue, you will begin to see how this strength has been shaping you quietly, intentionally, preparing you not just for an answer but for everything that follows it. Let me speak directly into the weariness you try so hard to hide, because I know how exhausted you are from carrying hope with trembling hands. You didn't expect faith to feel this heavy. You thought believing would energize you, not drain you. Yet here you are, still standing, still hoping, still holding on, even though your arms ache and your heart feels bruised from the effort. You wake up tired, not just physically, but emotionally tired of being strong, tired of explaining yourself, tired of pretending that the waiting hasn't changed you. You wonder how much longer you can keep going without something giving way. I see that fatigue clearly, and I want you to know that your tiredness does not disappoint me. It tells me how much you care. You have been holding on through moments when letting go seemed easier. You held on when answers didn't come, when encouragement dried up, when others moved on, and you felt left behind. You held on when your prayers felt repetitive, when hope felt fragile, when faith felt more like habit than fire. And sometimes you held on simply because you didn't know what else to do. That kind of endurance doesn't look heroic from the outside, but it is sacred. It costs something to keep choosing hope when disappointment feels familiar. It costs something to keep trusting when certainty never arrives. And that cost hath been paid quietly, daily, without applause. You told yourself you shouldn't be this tired, that maybe stronger faith wouldn't feel so strained. But faith is not the absence of exhaustion. It is the decision to stay present within it. You are not weak because you feel worn down. You are human. You are responding honestly to a long season of uncertainty. And here is what you need to hear. Your weariness is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that you have been carrying something that matters deeply to you for a long time. That matters to me too. You have been afraid to admit how tired you are because you don't want to sound ungrateful or faithless. You don't want to appear like you are giving up. But acknowledging your exhaustion is not surrender. It is honesty. You don't have to pretend strength when what you need is rest. You don't have to perform endurance to prove trust. I am not measuring you by how cheerful you remain while waiting. I am attentive to how sincerely you continue, even when joy feels distant. There is a difference between letting go and being held. You have been gripping tightly because you thought release meant loss. But there is another way to rest, by allowing yourself to be supported rather than suspended by your own effort. You don't need to carry this alone, and you never were meant to. The fatigue you feel is an invitation, not a failure. It is calling you to stop straining and start leaning, to stop proving and start trusting in a quieter way. As this conversation continues, you will begin to see that your tiredness is not the end of your strength. It is the threshold where something gentler, steadier begins. Stay with me here. You don't need to muster more effort. You need permission to breathe, and that permission has already been given. And now listen carefully, because discouragement has been lying to you. You are not as far from resolution as it feels. The distance you perceive is created by uncertainty, not reality. You have been measuring progress by visible change, by dramatic shifts, by clear signals that something is finally happening. When those signs did appear, you assumed nothing was moving at all. But closeness is not always loud. Sometimes it is subtle, almost invisible, revealed only in hindsight. And right now, you are standing nearer to what you've been praying for than your emotions will allow you to believe. You thought being close would feel obvious, lighter, easier, more hopeful. But proximity often comes with tension, not relief. It comes with vulnerability, with anticipation, with the unsettling sense that something is about to change and you're not fully in control of how. The discomfort you've been feeling lately, the restlessness, the heightened sensitivity, the awareness that something is shifting even if you can't name it, that is not regression. It is nearness. You are sensing movement because movement is happening, even if it hasn't yet taken form. You can recognize. You have already crossed distances you once thought were impossible. You survived moments you didn't think you would get through. You learned to sit with questions that once terrified you. You are responding differently now, more thoughtfully, more steadily than you did before. Those changes didn't happen by accident. They are markers of progress, evidence that you are no longer at the beginning, even if the end isn't fully visible. You are closer because you are different, and that difference matters more than you know. Closeness also requires readiness. Being near the answer means being willing to receive it without forcing it, without rushing to control it, without shaping it to fit old expectations. That is why the final stretch often feels the hardest. You are being asked to trust without clinging, to hope without grasping, to remain open without demanding certainty. That balance is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. What you are approaching cannot be met with the same posture you started with. You have grown, and the way you receive must grow too. You assumed that if you were close, doubt wouldn't visit you anymore. But doubt often intensifies near resolution because the stakes feel higher. You care more now. You have invested more. You have endured longer. That makes vulnerability sharper, not weaker. The enemy of progress is not doubt, it is discouragement that convinces you to stop just before the turning point. And you are closer than you think to that turning point. As we continue, you will begin to see how the final steps of waiting refine trust in a deeper way, preparing you not just to receive what you asked for, but to recognize it as it unfolds. Don't step back now. Don't assume distance where there is nearness. Stay present. Stay open. What you've been praying toward is already nearer than your fear suggests, and this is not the moment to turn away. Pause right here, because what you called delay was actually protection unfolding quietly around you. You assumed that if the answer had come sooner, everything would have been easier, cleaner, less painful. But you were only seeing the surface of what you wanted, not the full terrain of what it required. You were focused on relief. I was focused on preservation. There were things ahead of you, paths you would have taken too quickly, connections you would have trusted too easily, outcomes you would have accepted without discernment that would have cost you more than you realize. The waiting slowed you down just enough to keep you from walking straight into what looked right but wasn't safe. You couldn't see the misalignment forming behind certain opportunities. You couldn't see how some doors you wanted open would have trapped you in patterns you were still learning to outgrow. You couldn't see how certain people, had they arrived sooner, would have met you before you had the strength to set boundaries or the clarity to recognize red flags. You were praying for access, but access without readiness would have exposed you to harm you weren't equipped to navigate. The delay was not punishment, it was shielding. It stood between you and consequences you never had to experience because you were held back. You felt frustration when progress stalled, but that pause disrupted momentum that would have carried you too far, too fast, in the wrong direction. You didn't know how close you were to compromising your values just to end the waiting. You didn't know how vulnerable you were to settling for something almost right just because you were tired of nothing happening. The delay gave you space to recognize what truly matters to you, what aligns with your deeper convictions, and what you are no longer willing to sacrifice for temporary relief. That clarity would not have formed in haste. You thought you were being denied, but you were being guarded. Guarded from repeating cycles you asked to be free from. Guarded from entanglements that would have confused your healing. Guarded from outcomes that looked like answers, but would have required you to abandon parts of yourself you were just beginning to reclaim. You don't mourn dangers you never faced, but one day you will recognize how close they were and how quietly you were kept from them. Protection often feels like limitation when you don't know what you're being protected from. It feels like missed opportunity, like being overlooked, like being stuck behind a barrier you don't understand. But restraint has a wisdom of its own. It preserves what is still forming. It keeps you from pouring yourself into something that cannot hold you. It buys time for growth to catch up with desire. And right now, your growth mattered more than your speed. As this continues, you will start to see how certain disappointments were actually interventions, how certain closed doors spared you from wounds you would have carried for years. The delay did not set you back. It kept you intact. And that integrity or wholeness, your clarity, your steadiness is what will allow you to step forward without fear when the path truly opens. Stay with me here. The protection is not over yet, but neither is the promise you've been waiting for. Even when it looked like nothing was happening, movement was never absent. Much of it simply happened where you couldn't see. You searched for signs in the obvious places, watching circumstances, listening for news, waiting for something tangible to confirm that progress was underway. But the most important shifts were occurring beyond your line of sight, in layers of timing and connection you were never meant to manage. While you waited, pieces were being repositioned. While you questioned, relationships were being realigned. While you rested or struggled, conditions were quietly being prepared so that when the moment came, it would not collapse under its own weight. You assumed that if things were truly moving, you would feel it clearly. But behind the scenes work is rarely dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with noise or urgency. It unfolds patiently, coordinating details that must converge at the right moment, not just any moment. You were focused on the answer itself, but the answer depends on many parts moving together: timing, readiness, availability, and alignment. If even one of those arrives too early or too late, the whole structure becomes unstable. That is why things had to be rearranged carefully. Some people had to grow before they could meet you well. Some opportunities had to mature before they could sustain you. Some circumstances had to resolve before they could support what comes next. You couldn't rush that process any more than you could rush your own becoming. And so, while you were counting days, other timelines were unfolding. While you were questioning silence, conversations were happening elsewhere that would one day intersect with your life in meaningful ways. You were not forgotten. You were being positioned. You might be surprised how often your path depends on movements in places you never visit and choices made by people you've never met. That doesn't diminish your role, it contextualizes it. You are part of a larger arrangement, one that requires coordination beyond your control. That is not meant to make you feel small. It is meant to relieve you of the burden of managing everything yourself. You don't have to orchestrate what you could never oversee completely. Your role has been to remain open, honest, and willing. You felt stagnant because your personal effort wasn't producing immediate results. But not all progress is driven by exertion. Some of it is made possible by alignment, by things falling into place rather than being forced. And alignment takes time. It requires patience to allow pieces to settle where they belong instead of pushing them where they don't fit. You are learning to trust a process that doesn't center your urgency, but honors your long-term well-being. As we continue, you will begin to notice subtle confirmations that something has shifted, a conversation that lands differently, an opportunity that arrives with unexpected ease, a sense of readiness that wasn't there before. These are not coincidences. They are outcomes of careful rearrangement. What comes next will feel less forced, less frantic, more grounded. And when it does, you will understand that the quiet work behind the scenes was never inactivity, it was preparation unfolding with intention, guiding you toward what you've been praying for all along. Stay with me here, because this part explains the losses you didn't understand and the distance that hurt more than you expected. It wasn't cruelty. It was necessary separation. You wondered why certain people drifted away, why some connections faded without clear conflict, why things that once felt essential no longer fit. You questioned whether you had failed, whether you had changed too much, whether something was wrong with you. But what you've been asking for could not coexist with everything you were holding on to. Not every separation is rejection, some are realignment. And what you prayed for required space to breathe, room to grow, freedom from influences that would have quietly pulled you back into old versions of yourself. You didn't lose people because you weren't enough. You released them because you were becoming more aligned. Some relationships were tied to seasons that taught you survival, not sustainability. They helped you endure, but they were not meant to help you evolve. If they had remained unchanged, they would have demanded compromises from you, small ones at first, then larger ones that would have slowly eroded your clarity, your boundaries, your sense of self. You didn't see that at the time because familiarity feels safe, even when it limits you. Separation disrupted that comfort so that growth could continue. You felt the ache of distance because you care deeply. You grieve not just people, but the versions of yourself that existed with them. You mourned shared history, unspoken understanding, and the security of what you knew. That grief was real, and it mattered. But holding on to what was familiar would have kept you tethered to expectations that no longer fit who you are becoming. You were asking for expansion, for healing, for forward movement. Those things require room. They require courage to walk without constant affirmation. They require trust that what lies ahead can hold you, even if what lies behind once did. Separation also protected you from distraction. Some voices around you were shaping your decisions more than you realized. Some opinions were louder than your own intuition. Some patterns were being reinforced simply because they were shared. Distance allowed you to hear yourself again. It gave you clarity without commentary, space without pressure, time to discern what you truly want versus what you were taught to accept. That clarity is not accidental, it is foundational for what comes next. You may still feel the absence at times. That doesn't mean the separation was wrong. It means you are human and capable of attachment. But don't confuse missing something with needing it. Growth often requires grieving what no longer belongs to your future. As this unfolds, you will begin to notice that the space created by separation is not empty, it is available. Available for new understanding, new alignment, new connections that meet you where you are now, not where you were. This is not about isolation, it is about integrity. What you've been asking for demanded honesty with yourself and courage to stand without leaning on what once steadied you. That courage is growing in you. And soon, you will recognize that what felt like loss was actually clearing, making room for something that can meet you fully, without asking you to shrink or compromise. Stay with me. The space you're standing in now is not barren. It is prepared. Now listen closely, because this lesson has been shaping you quietly and deeply. You were learning how to trust without proof, and that is not a small thing. You wanted reassurance you could point to, signs you could measure, outcomes you could plan around. You wanted evidence that the waiting had meaning and that your hope wasn't misplaced. But instead of certainty, you were given ambiguity. Instead of confirmation, you were given choice, the choice to continue trusting even when nothing external supported that decision. That choice has been forming something in you that certainty never could. You learned how much of your trust depended on visibility. When things made sense, you felt confident. When progress was obvious, you felt secure. But when clarity disappeared, your trust was tested not to break it, but to deepen it. You were being invited to move from transactional trust, where belief depends on results, to relational trust, where belief rests on consistency of presence. The transition is uncomfortable because it removes control. You can't manage outcomes you can't see. You can only decide how you will show up in the uncertainty. You questioned yourself often during this phase. You wondered if you were being foolish, if you were clinging to hope unnecessarily, if wisdom would suggest letting go. Those questions didn't make you weak, they made you honest. And honesty is where real trust begins. You kept choosing to stay open, even when closing off would have felt safer. You kept listening, even when silence dominated the conversation. You kept showing up, even when you couldn't measure progress. That is not passive faith, it is active endurance. Trust without evidence reshapes how you relate to fear. Fear loses its authority when you no longer need certainty to move forward. You begin to understand that not knowing doesn't mean you're lost. It means you're navigating something bigger than your immediate understanding. You stop demanding guarantees and start developing discernment. You learn how to sit with discomfort without rushing to escape it. That ability will serve you far beyond this season. You didn't realize it at the time, but each unanswered question strengthened your inner steadiness. Each moment you chose to trust without confirmation loosened fear's grip. You became less reactive, less desperate for reassurance, more grounded in your own values. You learned how to stand without leaning on signs, how to remain open without needing constant validation. That kind of trust is not naive, it is resilient. As this continues, you will begin to see that trust without evidence prepared you to receive what's coming without being undone by it. You won't cling to it out of fear of loss. You will panic when things shift. You won't collapse when outcomes evolve. You will engage with clarity and calm because your trust is no longer conditional. That is what this season has been building. You were not wandering aimlessly, you were being taught how to trust in a way that endures. Stay here with me. What comes next will require exactly the steadiness you've been developing all along. Let this land gently, but honestly. You asked for peace, and I answered by loosening your grip on control. You imagined peace would arrive as calm circumstances, predictable outcomes, and the comfort of knowing what comes next. You thought peace would feel like certainty wrapped in reassurance. But what you were really asking for was freedom from anxiety, and anxiety feeds on the illusion of control. So the very thing that had to be addressed was the need to manage everything, every outcome, every reaction, every possibility. Peace could not coexist with that constant vigilance. Something had to give, and it wasn't your peace, it was your control. You didn't realize how tightly you were holding everything together until your hands began to ache. You monitored situations closely, replayed conversations, anticipated problems before they existed. You told yourself this was responsibility, wisdom, preparedness. But beneath it was fear of being disappointed again, fear of being caught off guard, fear of trusting something beyond your management. You prayed for peace while still believing it was your job to ensure nothing went wrong. That tension is exhausting, and it is not sustainable. Peace does not come from controlling the environment. It comes from trusting yourself within it. So control began to slip, not all at once, but gradually. Plans didn't work out. Timelines changed. People acted unpredictably. Situations refused to conform to your expectations. At first, this felt destabilizing, even threatening. You wondered why things seemed more uncertain after you prayed for peace. But what was actually happening was a dismantling of the false belief that control equals safety. Safety comes from resilience, from adaptability, from knowing you can respond rather than preempt everything. That lesson cannot be learned while clinging to certainty. Releasing control doesn't mean becoming passive or careless. It means recognizing where your influence ends and your trust begins. It means allowing space for things to unfold without trying to force clarity prematurely. You were learning how to stay grounded even when outcomes were unclear, how to remain steady even when answers weren't immediate. That steadiness is peace, not the absence of challenge, but the presence of inner calm that isn't dependent on external order. You resisted this at first because control had protected you before. It had helped you survive unpredictable seasons, navigate instability, and avoid pain. But what protects you in survival can limit you in growth. Peace required a different posture, one that didn't rely on constant vigilance, one that allowed rest without guilt, one that trusted your capacity to handle whatever comes rather than trying to prevent everything that could go wrong. That shift is uncomfortable because it feels like vulnerability. But vulnerability is where peace lives. As this continues, you will notice moments where you pause instead of panic, where you breathe instead of brace. You will feel the urge to intervene soften, replaced by a quieter confidence. That is not apathy. It is peace taking root. You didn't lose control to chaos, you released it to calm. And that calm is becoming your new way of moving through the world. Not because everything is predictable, but because you no longer need it to be. Listen closely now, because this reframes everything you thought was lost. Your tears were not signs of failure. They were acts of planting. You believed that crying meant you were breaking, that grief meant regression, that sorrow marked the absence of progress. But every tear carried information, intention, and honesty. You didn't cry because you were weak. You cried because something mattered deeply to you. Those moments you tried to rush through, apologize for, or hide, they were moments of release, moments where truth surfaced without restraint. Nothing honest is ever wasted. You shed tears in private when you felt misunderstood, unseen, or overwhelmed. You cried over endings you didn't choose and hopes that felt deferred. You cried because holding everything together became too heavy, and something had to give. Those tears loosened what had been trapped inside you: unspoken grief, unresolved disappointment, quiet resentment. They softened places that had hardened in self-protection. They allowed you to feel without fixing, to grieve without justification. That vulnerability was not destructive, it was fertile. Seeds are planted in darkness, beneath the surface, where no one applauds the process. Growth begins invisibly, long before anything breaks through the soil. Your tears worked the same way. They prepared the ground of your inner life, breaking up what was compacted by endurance and habit. They created space for compassion, for humility, for empathy. They made you more tender, not more fragile. And tenderness is not weakness, it is openness to life, to connection, to change. You judged yourself for how long the sadness lingered. You told yourself you should be past it by now, stronger by now, more resolved. But healing does not follow deadlines. Processing loss, disappointment, and uncertainty takes time, and tears are part of that language. They are how the body and spirit release what words cannot carry. You didn't fall behind when you cried. You went deeper. And depth is where lasting growth takes root. What grows from tears is not always immediate happiness. Sometimes it is understanding. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is the ability to sit with others in their pain without needing to solve it. You are becoming someone who knows how to hold complexity, who understands that joy and sorrow can coexist, who doesn't rush past discomfort to appear composed. That capacity will shape the way you love, the way you lead, the way you live. As this unfolds, you will begin to notice new growth where you expected only loss, new insight where you once felt confusion, new steadiness where you once felt fragile. The tears you thought slowed you down were actually nourishing something strong and resilient within you. Nothing you released in honesty was wasted. It was planted. And what grows from it will surprise you, not because the pain was necessary, but because you allowed it to transform rather than harden you. Stay here. The ground you watered is beginning to stir. There was a moment quiet, unannounced, and deeply personal when you stood at the edge of letting go, and I saw it clearly. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices or final declarations. It was subtle, almost invisible to everyone else. A sigh held a little longer than usual. A prayer shortened into silence. A decision to stop expecting anything more. You told yourself you weren't giving up, just being realistic, just protecting your heart from another disappointment. But inside, something wavered. You wondered if continuing was worth the cost. You questioned whether hope had become heavier than the pain of surrender. I know that moment because I was present in it with you. You didn't announce your struggle because you were tired of explaining. You didn't ask for help because you didn't want to sound ungrateful or dramatic. You simply endured quietly, telling yourself to lower expectations and move on emotionally, even if you stayed outwardly faithful. That internal retreat felt safer. It felt like control, but it also felt like grief. You mourned the version of yourself that once believed more easily, hoped more freely, trusted more openly. You thought losing that softness would make you stronger. In reality, it only made you more guarded. What you didn't realize is that nearly giving up doesn't erase the journey, it reveals how much it mattered. You don't reach that edge unless you've invested deeply. You don't feel that kind of exhaustion unless you've been carrying something meaningful for a long time. I didn't see weakness in that moment. I saw honesty. I saw a heart that had tried everything it knew how to do and was running out of strategies. That is not failure. That is the point where performance ends and truth begins. You didn't walk away, even though you considered it. You didn't shut down completely, even though you were tempted. You stayed quietly, imperfectly, without certainty. That staying mattered more than you know. Not because it impressed anyone, but because it kept you open just enough for the next shift to occur. Giving up would have closed the door. Staying cracked it open. And that small opening was enough. You may judge yourself for how close you came to quitting. You may replay that season and feel ashamed of your doubt, your fatigue, your frustration. But doubt does not disqualify commitment. Fatigue does not negate sincerity. Frustration does not erase faith. You were human in a long process, responding honestly to prolonged uncertainty. That honesty did not push you away from growth, it grounded you in it. What formed in that near breaking point was a deeper resilience. Not the kind that pretends everything is fine, but the kind that continues even when it isn't. You learned that you could feel discouraged and still choose to remain present. You learned that hope doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes it is nothing more than the decision not to walk away entirely. The decision reshaped you quietly, strengthening something that will carry you through what comes next. As this unfolds, you will begin to understand that the moment you almost gave up did not weaken you, it refined you. It stripped away illusions and left something honest behind. And that honesty is what allows you to move forward without pretending, without forcing, without fear of breaking again. You are still here. And that matters more than you realize. Let me show you something gently, but truthfully, if you had stepped away when you almost did, you would have missed the convergence that is forming now. Not because everything would have fallen apart, but because timing requires presence. What is unfolding depends on you being here, open, available, willing. Quitting wouldn't have erased your worth, but it would have removed you from the path that is aligning beneath your feet. You were closer than you knew, and walking away then would have meant starting over later, carrying more regret than relief. You thought quitting would protect you from disappointment, but it would have cost you momentum you couldn't see. Progress doesn't always feel like movement. Sometimes it feels like pressure, like resistance, like standing still while something gathers strength behind the scenes. You mistook that pressure for stagnation. In reality, it was compression, everything drawing closer together, preparing to shift. That final stretch often feels the hardest because it demands the most trust with the least visible evidence. What's coming is not a sudden miracle dropped into your lap. It is the result of many quiet alignments reaching readiness at the same time. Your growth, others' readiness, circumstances settling, timing opening. These things rarely synchronize without patience. Quitting would have interrupted that synchronization. It would have relieved your immediate discomfort but delayed your deeper fulfillment. Staying, even half-heartedly, kept you within reach of what's now approaching. You underestimated the value of your endurance. You thought persistence only mattered if it felt confident and hopeful. But endurance counts even when it feels tired, uncertain, and fragile. You stayed when it would have been easier to disengage emotionally. You continue when you could have numbed yourself into indifference. That choice preserved your sensitivity, your awareness, your capacity to recognize opportunity when it appears. Disengagement dulls perception. Presence sharpens it. You are now positioned to receive something you wouldn't have recognized earlier. Not because it didn't exist, but because you weren't ready to hold it without fear or distortion. The waiting refined your vision. It slowed your impulses. It taught you to discern rather than grasp. That discernment will matter when things begin to move, because not every opportunity is an answer, and not every answer arrives the way you expect. You are prepared now to notice the difference. Missing what's coming would have looked like relief at first. You would have convinced yourself that letting go was wise, that moving on was mature. But eventually, a quiet question would have surfaced. What if I had stayed just a little longer? That question would have lingered, unresolved. You were spared that burden because you remained. Even when staying felt passive, it was powerful. Even when it felt unproductive, it was positioning you. As this continues, you will begin to sense a shift, not a rush, not a spectacle, but a steady unfolding that feels different from everything before it. Less forced, less frantic, more grounded. You didn't stay for nothing. You stayed for this convergence, this readiness, this moment where what you've carried begins to meet you halfway. And now, because you didn't quit, you are here to see it take shape. Hold steady now, because clarity is approaching, and when it does, it will illuminate the long stretch you couldn't explain. You have been living inside unanswered questions, learning how to move forward without a map, trusting your steps even when the destination felt abstract. The waiting asked you to believe, without knowing how everything would connect. That kind of patience is not blind, it is brave. And soon, the threads that felt scattered will begin to weave into something coherent. What I'm about to do will not erase the waiting, but it will translate it. You will recognize why certain doors stayed closed, why timing refused to bend, why your growth mattered as much as your desire. Understanding rarely arrives all at once. It unfolds in layers, small realizations that land gently, followed by moments of sudden recognition that stop you mid-step. You will notice how experiences you once dismissed as delays were actually lessons preparing your perception. You will see how conversations you thought were insignificant shaped your readiness. You will understand why you had to feel the weight of uncertainty long enough to develop trust that doesn't collapse when clarity is partial. None of this was arbitrary. The waiting was not empty space. It was a classroom, and you learned more than you realize. You wanted answers early because uncertainty felt threatening. But early answers would have been incomplete. They would have made sense of the moment without accounting for the future. Now, as things begin to align, your understanding will deepen. You will see how one decision led to another, how one pause redirected you, how one disappointment spared you from a more costly detour. The story will not be rewritten to avoid pain. It will be reframed to reveal purpose. That reframing changes how you carry your past and how you approach what's next. This clarity will not arrive to prove anything to others. It will arrive to settle something within you. You will stop replaying old questions because they will no longer need answers. You will stop wondering if you misread the signs because the direction will feel grounded rather than urgent. You will move with a steadiness that doesn't rely on external affirmation. That is the gift of understanding earned through patience. It anchors you instead of exciting you into impulsive motion. Be prepared for the quiet way this clarity may arrive. It might come through a conversation that resonates unexpectedly, an opportunity that fits without force, or a sense of peace that settles without explanation. It might come as a realization that you are no longer asking the same questions because you no longer need to. Meaning often reveals itself, not through spectacle, but through alignment, the sense that your inner life and your outer direction finally agree. When the waiting makes sense, you won't wish it away. You won't romanticize the struggle, but you will respect the growth it demanded. You will understand that the time you spent becoming was not time lost, but time invested. And with that understanding will come a confidence that doesn't rush ahead or cling behind. You will move forward knowing that what unfolds next is not disconnected from what you endured, it is informed by it. Stay present. The clarity you longed for is not distant. It is forming, and it will arrive with the weight of recognition rather than the noise of relief. Prepare your expectations, because what approaches will stretch them beyond the shape you imagined. You prayed with the language you had at the time, framed by your experiences, your fears, your understanding of what was possible. You asked for relief from pain, resolution to uncertainty, a change you could recognize easily. But your request was only the doorway. What comes through it carries more depth, more reach, more consequence than you initially conceived. Not because your asking was small, but because your vision was still forming. You asked for a solution to a problem, but what unfolds addresses the pattern beneath it. You asked for an outcome, but what arrives reshapes your capacity to engage with outcomes altogether. You asked for something external to shift, but the greater answer includes an internal steadiness that doesn't dissolve when circumstances fluctuate. This doesn't mean you were wrong to ask as you did. It means you asked honestly from where you stood, and growth expanded what you could receive. Greater doesn't always mean louder or more dramatic. Sometimes it means more sustainable, more integrated, more aligned with who you've become rather than who you were trying to escape. The answer you receive will not just solve a moment. It will influence the direction of your life in ways you can't yet predict. It will open paths you didn't know to request and close others you didn't realize were limiting you. It will bring responsibility alongside relief, clarity alongside complexity, opportunity alongside discernment. That is the nature of something greater. It carries weight, not just excitement. You once thought the best outcome would remove struggle entirely. Now you are learning that a better outcome equips you to navigate struggle without losing yourself. You once hoped for certainty. Now you are prepared for wisdom. You once wanted speed. Now you can sustain depth. This shift in readiness is why the answer had to grow beyond the original request. You are no longer asking as someone desperate to escape discomfort. You are asking as someone capable of stewarding change. Don't be surprised if the answer challenges you in unexpected ways. Growth often arrives disguised as responsibility, invitation, or choice. It asks you to engage, not just receive. It invites participation rather than passive enjoyment. That may feel daunting at first, but you are ready for it. The waiting has tempered urgency with insight. The uncertainty has refined your discernment. You can recognize value without rushing to possess it. As this continues, you will notice that what you receive does more than satisfy, it expands. It deepens your compassion, sharpens your clarity, steadies your confidence. It impacts others not because you announce it, but because it changes how you show up. The answer becomes a platform for influence, a source of quiet leadership, a testament to patience lived rather than preached. You asked for what you knew how to name. What arrives meets that request and then exceeds it because you are now capable of holding more. Stay open to the greater shape of the answer. Don't confine it to old expectations. Let it surprise you into growth. The door you knocked on is opening wider than you imagined, and you are stepping into something that honors both your asking and your becoming. Let this settle deeply, because what is unfolding goes beyond the request you carried for so long. I am not merely responding to what you asked. I am tending to what was worn down along the way. You came seeking an answer, but you also arrived carrying fatigue, disappointment, and the quiet erosion that happens when hope has to wait longer than expected. Restoration is not a side effect of the answer. It is the context in which the answer must live. Without restoration, even the right outcome would feel hollow, fragile, or overwhelming. So the work has been holistic, intentional, and patient, touching places you didn't know were still tender. You have been functioning for a while rather than fully living. You learned how to adapt, to keep moving, to meet expectations while quietly setting parts of yourself aside. You told yourself you would feel again once things resolved, once the pressure lifted, once the answer came. But restoration doesn't wait until the end. It prepares you along the way. It brings you back to yourself gradually, reminding you how to listen inwardly, how to honor your limits, how to receive care without guilt. You are rediscovering your own voice, your own rhythm, your own worth independent of outcomes. That is not incidental, it is foundational. You are being restored in how you trust, not with blind optimism, but with grounded confidence. You are being restored in how you hope, not desperately, but openly. You are being restored in how you see yourself not as someone perpetually waiting, but as someone actively becoming. These shifts change the way you receive anything good. They prevent you from clutching it out of fear or dismissing it out of disbelief. Restoration steadies your hands so you can hold what comes without shaking. Restoration also revisits the narratives you adopted during the wait. The quiet self-critic that told you to expect less. The inner voice that framed delay as deficiency. The belief that endurance meant silence. Those narratives are being rewritten gently, not erased abruptly. You are learning that worth is not proven by outcomes, that patience is not passivity, that your sensitivity is not a liability. You are remembering what it feels like to be present without bracing, hopeful without bargaining, open without needing to perform resilience. This process may feel subtle, even ordinary, but its impact is profound. Restoration changes how you relate to joy, you allow it without suspicion. It changes how you handle disappointment, you process it without self-blame. It changes how you engage with the future, you plan without panic. These are not small changes. They are the infrastructure that supports a life that can expand without fracturing. And that life is what the answer must inhabit. As this continues, you may notice moments of unexpected ease, gentle clarity, or emotional spaciousness. Don't rush to analyze them. Let them arrive. They are signs that restoration is taking root. The answer will come, but it will meet you as someone renewed rather than depleted. You are not being fixed. You are being returned to balance, to wholeness, to yourself. And that restoration is not a detour from what you prayed for. It is the way the prayer becomes a blessing rather than a burden. Pay attention to this turn, because your journey has never been isolated. It has been shaping a story larger than you imagined. You thought the waiting was private, the struggle internal, the growth personal. And it was. But it was never only that. The way you carried uncertainty with honesty, the way you stayed present without certainty, the way you allowed yourself to be changed rather than hardened, these things have been witnessed, even when you didn't feel seen. Your story is becoming a quiet testimony, not because it is dramatic, but because it is real. You may not realize who has been watching you navigate this season. People notice steadiness more than success. They notice humility more than answers. They notice how you speak about hope when it has cost you something. Your story doesn't need embellishment. Its credibility comes from endurance lived without spectacle. When others see you respond with clarity instead of bitterness, patience instead of panic, openness instead of withdrawal, they recognize something trustworthy at work. Not perfection, faithfulness. Your story will matter not because it proves everything works out neatly, but because it shows how to remain human in the in-between. It will give language to those who don't know how to articulate their own waiting. It will offer permission to trust without pretending, to grieve without quitting, to hope without demanding guarantees. That kind of influence doesn't announce itself loudly, but it settles deeply. It reassures people that growth is possible without shortcuts, that meaning can be found without immediate resolution. You might feel hesitant about this visibility. You don't want to be an example. You don't want your pain to be instructional. That hesitation is understandable. But sharing a story doesn't mean exposing wounds prematurely or performing strength. It means allowing authenticity to exist without shame. Your story will speak in timing and tone that fits you. Sometimes it will be a conversation. Sometimes it will be a quiet presence. Sometimes it will be the way you listen without rushing to fix. Influence doesn't require a platform. It requires integrity. As the answer unfolds, others will connect the dots in ways you may not. They will see the patience behind the progress. They will sense the depth behind the calm. They will recognize that what you carry now is not accidental, it was cultivated. And that recognition will encourage them to stay in their own process rather than abandoning it. Your story becomes a mirror, reflecting possibility rather than prescribing outcomes. This is not pressure. It is purpose expressed gently. You are not responsible for how others interpret your journey. You are only invited to live it honestly. The faithfulness others see is not a performance you maintain. It is a consistency you inhabit. And consistency grows from the kind of restoration and clarity you've been receiving. As this continues, you will notice moments when someone's question, relief, or gratitude intersects with your experience. Receive those moments without shrinking. They are not asking you to be more than you are. They are recognizing what you've become. Your story is still unfolding, but it already carries weight, not because it is finished, but because it is faithful. And through that faithfulness, others will find courage to keep going too. Let me pull the curtain back for a moment, because the resistance you felt was not random, it was reactive. Discouragement did not arrive because you were weak. It arrived because you were close to something that mattered. The pressure intensified precisely when alignment deepened. You noticed it as heaviness without explanation, as second guessing that appeared suddenly, as fatigue that didn't match your circumstances. You wondered why discouragement seemed to whisper loudest when you were doing your best to stay open. That wasn't coincidence. It was interference, an attempt to derail you by exhausting your will rather than confronting your strength. Discouragement works quietly. It doesn't demand that you abandon everything at once. It suggests you scale back hope, lower expectations, detach emotionally just in case. It reframes patience as foolishness and waiting as wasted effort. It invites you to protect yourself by disengaging rather than by discerning. You felt that invitation when you considered numbing yourself to disappointment, when you thought about moving on prematurely, when you told yourself that caring less would hurt less. That voice didn't need to be loud to be effective, it only needed to sound reasonable. But here's what you didn't see at the time. Discouragement showed up because you were becoming steady. It sensed the shift before you named it. It recognized the growth in your discernment, the softening of your fear, the strengthening of your trust. It attempted to interrupt momentum by clouding your perception, by making you doubt your progress, by convincing you that nothing meaningful was happening. The goal was not to defeat you outright, but to slow you just enough to make you question whether continuing was worth the effort. You responded imperfectly, and that's important to acknowledge. You felt discouraged. You hesitated. You doubted. But you didn't disconnect. You didn't harden into cynicism. You didn't abandon yourself to apathy. You kept listening, even when listening was difficult. You stayed curious rather than closed. That mattered. Discouragement loses its power when it fails to isolate you from your own awareness. You stayed connected to your values, to your honesty, to your willingness to grow. That connection protected you more than certainty ever could. The presence of discouragement is not proof of impending failure. It is often evidence of meaningful transition. When old patterns begin to loosen, resistance increases. When growth becomes inevitable, pressure intensifies. You were not being punished. You were being challenged at the threshold. And thresholds are uncomfortable by nature. They mark the space between what was and what is becoming. Discouragement tried to convince you that staying in the doorway was pointless. But doorways exist if arising never a tree. You are learning now how to recognize discouragement without obeying it. You can name it without letting it define you. You can feel it without surrendering to it. That skill will serve you long after this season ends. You will encounter resistance again whenever you grow, whenever you choose alignment over ease, but it will not surprise you the way it once did. You will recognize the pattern. Discouragement flares when direction clarifies. Doubt rises when trust deepens. Fatigue surfaces when readiness nears. As this continues, you will feel a different kind of strength, not the adrenaline of motivation, but the steadiness of discernment. You will know when to rest without withdrawing, when to pause without quitting, when to listen without absorbing every voice. Discouragement did not stop you because it could not take what you were becoming. And now, with that awareness, you stand less vulnerable to its pull. You are still moving forward, not hurried, not forced, but intact. And that forward movement is exactly what the resistance was trying to prevent. Stay present, because this is the shift you've been sensing without being able to explain. The unfolding has begun. Not as a single moment, not as a dramatic interruption, but as a sequence of openings that meet you where you are now, not where you started. You expected a sudden arrival, a clear finish line, a definitive signal that the waiting was over. But what unfolds rarely announces itself with finality. It reveals itself through readiness, yours and the circumstances aligning with it. And that alignment is happening quietly, steadily, with intention. Preparation now looks different than it did before. It is no longer about endurance. It is about attentiveness. You are being invited to notice subtle shifts, to respond rather than rush, to participate rather than brace. The unfolding will ask you to stay open without being impulsive, hopeful without being naive, confident without being rigid. You are ready for that balance because you've practiced it unknowingly throughout the waiting. The muscles you built in patience are now supporting movement. The clarity you gained in stillness is now guiding action. What you've been praying for is not arriving to rescue you from your life. It is integrating into it. It will meet you in ordinary moments and require conscious engagement. It may arrive through conversations that feel timely, opportunities that fit without forcing, or decisions that feel clear rather than urgent. You will recognize it not by intensity, but by coherence, the sense that things finally make sense together. That coherence is the hallmark of readiness fulfilled. Prepare yourself by releasing the need for perfection. You don't have to respond flawlessly. You don't have to know everything in advance. You only need to remain honest, present, and willing. Preparation is not about bracing for impact. It is about making space to receive without distortion. Let go of the belief that you must be completely healed, completely confident, completely certain before anything good can begin. Growth continues even as the unfolding happens. Readiness is not completion. It is alignment. You may feel excitement mixed with hesitation. That's natural. Newness carries responsibility as well as possibility. Let that hesitation slow you into wisdom rather than pull you back into fear. Ask yourself not, what if this goes wrong? But how can I engage this with integrity? You are not stepping into the unknown unprepared. You are stepping into it informed by everything you've learned. The waiting did not empty you. It equipped you. As the unfolding continues, trust the pace. Don't rush to label it or claim it prematurely. Let it show you what it is becoming. Participate with curiosity rather than control. You will know when to move, when to pause, when to speak, when to listen. That discernment is part of the answer you've been given. You are not being handed a conclusion. You are being invited into a living process that grows with you. What you've been praying for is not a destination you arrive at and stop. It is a direction you step into, one that keeps revealing itself as you walk. Prepare yourself by staying grounded, staying open, staying connected to what matters. The unfolding is not something to chase, it is something to meet. And you are meeting it now, not because the waiting ended, but because it accomplished exactly what it needed to. Amen.